Shilima Hemen. My name is Darius, and today we'll be making some Sumerian beer. This recipe is based off of the Sumerian hymn to Ninkasi, a record of how to brew wheat beer. Ninkasi is the Sumerian deity of beer and brewing, but her hymn is a little cryptic at parts, so today I'll be attempting to break it down to a much simpler process. The finished product should be about 4.5 to about 6% proof alcohol, but it's quite difficult to regulate this accurately given how rudimentary this process is. Before we begin, I have a few disclaimers. This is a recipe to create an alcoholic beverage, so please do not make this if you're underage. Also, if you're planning to replicate this at home, you have got to check the laws on home brewing wherever you are. For me, it's perfectly legal to brew it unless you're planning on selling, but for you it may be completely different. In any case, disclaimers aside, let's take a look at the world that was. To begin with, you'll need some wheat berries, some barley flour, and a vessel to brew everything in. I'm going to be using a glass demijohn, but you can be more authentic by using a terracotta vase or a pot. The whole brewing process takes about a week in total. So, for the first day, you're going to want to place about 60 grams or half a cup of wheat berries into a bowl. Fill this to the top with water and let it sit overnight. This marks the end of the first day, or night, I suppose. The following morning, drain these berries from the water, reserving about a cup's worth of it, and place the damp berries onto a clean dishcloth. Wrap this up and keep damp for the rest of the day. Make sure that they're kept in a dark place too. On the same day, you'll need to combine about 130 grams or about 1.5 cups of barley flour with some water to make the bapir. Add water until it forms a cohesive dough, knead and mix this together until it can just about hold its shape, and then cover with a dishcloth to set aside. This will act as the yeast used in the fermentation process, because you're essentially forming a very basic sourdough using wild yeast. If you're uncomfortable with using wild yeast, you can of course add a packet of active dry yeast to the dough. This marks the end of the second day. Then, set everything aside for a day. Make sure the wheat berries remain damp and the bapir stays covered, but for the most part you do nothing on day 3. The following day, take your bapir and bake it at 150 degrees Celsius or about 300 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 or 15 minutes. This is just to form a seal over the exterior and leave the insides of it uncooked. This will allow it to ferment and get a much better taste. Now, place your wheat berries onto a clean tray and try and keep them in a single layer. Put this into the oven at 150 degrees Celsius or 300 Fahrenheit for about 20 minutes or until they start to brown. Try not to let anything burn, but if a few do, it really doesn't matter. Put the baked berries and the bapir aside for tomorrow. This marks the end of the 4th day. Now, day 5 would be the most labor-intensive part of this whole process. First, you'll want to place about a half cup of chopped dates into a pot, fill it up with water, and boil for a while until this thickens and turns into a kind of rudimentary syrup. This syrup is going to enhance the sweetness and alcohol content of your finished brew. In the meantime, while this is cooking away, you can prepare the rest of your ingredients. Take your wheat berries and crack and grind them into a mortar and pestle. If you don't have one of these lying around, you can easily put these into a Ziploc bag and crush them using a rolling pin. When you're done, put this aside and take out your bapir. Cut or tear this loaf up into small pieces, preferably smaller than the opening to your brewing vessel. Toss your ground up wheat berries into the vessel that you're using, followed by the bapir. As you can see here, my chunks were a little bit too big, so I had to kind of crush it through. Then, add your finished date syrup. Pour about 2 liters worth of water on top of everything in there, and mix it around so it's all combined. Then, cover the opening of your vessel with a dishcloth. Secure this, put the vessel away somewhere dark to ferment, and that's it. That's the end of day 5. Day 6 is spent waiting for your brew to finish, and on day 7 we can finally take a look at it. Your finished beer on day 7 should be hazy and pale. You can decant your brew by using a siphon and siphon it into bottles, like I'm doing here. But try not to stir up any of the sediment at the bottom of the vessel because that just does not taste good. If you want to drink like a real Sumerian though, just take a very long straw and take a sip right from the vessel. Drinking beer was a communal activity to the Sumerians and a sign of a civilized person according to the Epic of Gilgamesh. I tried this and found that using a straw while drinking this brew lets you get a sweeter, smoother drink that's further down in the vessel, rather than the somewhat more bitter tasting beer at the top. This makes me think that it kind of separates or settles if left alone undrunk for too long. If you want, you could have also added rose petals, cardamom, or some other spices to the brew on day 5 before you let it ferment. This would have added some new flavors and tones to your finished brew, but it's nice enough plain like this. It's very unlike modern beers in that it's uncarbonated and only has a shelf life of maybe a couple of days after it's been bottled, and it was also intended to be drunk warm, or rather at room temperature. but it's still a very tasty drink, and you can really see why it was one of the first few things made in ancient Mesopotamia. I've been Darius, and I hope you enjoyed this look at the world that was.